Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning Blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about a very important topic in the government world, which are the proposed changes to Green Book. So the Green Book, which is formerly known as the Standards for Internal Control in the federal government, is often used by federal agencies, but also sometimes by governments or nonprofits, as it is identified in the single audit world as being an acceptable method for internal controls. It's listed as a best practice for the uniform guidance in designing and implementing internal control structures for organizations. And the last time they updated the Green Book was in 2014, around the same time, right after actually, COSO was updated. So it's been about a decade, and there's been a lot that's happened since then. So in June of 2024, the federal government put out a proposal to update the Green Book. They recognize that obviously it's been a decade since it was last updated, and things like the pandemic, right, COVID, as well as recent cyber attacks on a lot of governmental agencies have really highlighted the challenges that management faces when trying to address risk related to fraud, improper payment, information security. We know the new uniform guidance talks about the importance of cybersecurity to protect personally identifiable information, right? So when we have all of this information around eligibility, allowability, et cetera, that's going to have a lot of information that needs to be protected. And with the increase and rise in cyber attacks, how are we properly protecting them? So the uniform guidance already includes this update, which is effective October 1st. And so naturally, GAO is incorporating some of those best practices into the Green Book, because the Green Book is one of the methods used by governmental entities and nonprofits to really ensure that they're designing a system that's going to be successful to the extent possible, right, provides reasonable assurance of regarding achievement of objectives. And so this is going to have a number of changes. Obviously, they're not scratching the whole thing. So there's going to be a lot of clarification, adding some additional requirements, but providing a lot more application guidance to try to have people understand the intent of some of these principles, and also adding resources and appendices to help people understand how to address this. And so to incorporate in the design, implementation, and operations of an effective internal control system. And again, because their goal is always to harmonize with COSO, because we don't want to have things completely different. So there are little modifications that are included in here that we're going to talk about. Now, there are more changes than we're going to cover in today's blog. We're just going to give you a little flavor for what's in there and hope that encourages you to read the document and potentially provide comments to the federal government. So overall, big picture, we're keeping the 5 components of internal control. We're keeping the 17 principles, right? So we're not scratching the core, but what we are doing is modifying certain principles, adding or expanding certain attributes in order to really assist entities in understanding how to apply this. If you're familiar with COSO, attributes are similar to when we get into those points of focus, right? So we use kind of different terminology, but they're similar concept. They're sort of examples that help us understand the principles. So it kind of goes from the component to the principles, and then under Green Book, it goes to attributes. They also added 2 new documentation requirements, and for 2 of them, also modified documentation requirements, and 2 new appendices. Always good to have resources. So we have some examples of both preventative and detective activities, and then additional resources around designing, implementing, and operating an effective system, specifically around fraud, improper payment, information security, and implementation of new or substantially changed programs, including emergency assistance programs, right? Thinking of some of the lessons learned. Remember, GAO has done a number of reports on some of the fraud from this emergency assistance, right? So during COVID, our goal was to get money out there quickly. But we also know that in getting that money out there quickly, the controls weren't really good. Lots of people received funds that they really shouldn't have, and they've done some pretty abhorrent things with them. And the GAO is going after those people. We've seen a lot of the reports talk about the money that they've recuperated and the sentencing that they have gotten for some of these people. But what we know is we want to prevent that, not have to get it on the back end. And so as a result, these appendices are there to help with some of the improvements, sort of lessons learned from COVID. So in terms of those two new documentation requirements, management's now going to document the results of the risk assessment, including identification, analysis, and response that are completed on both a periodic and ongoing basis. And again, they're going to have that additional clarification around that fraud, improper payment, information security, and significant internal and external changes as we think about those. And that's paragraph 715. And then in paragraph 908, management documenting a process for responding to significant changes and related risks so that the internal controls can quickly adapt as needed, right? So that response to emergency pandemic concepts. In terms of that improper payment and information security, it adds a requirement to consider risk related to the information and security and improper payments when doing your risk identification, analysis, and response. So very much tying to some of the lessons learned from the pandemic as well as from these recent cyber attacks. In terms of fraud, they have taken the types of fraud to kind of broaden them and expand the concept around fraud being both financial and non-financial, right? So when we think about fraud, we often think about occupational fraud similar to the ACFE, but there's other fraud that is just willful misrepresentation in obtaining something of value. It's not always going to be a financial oriented item. And then when we look at things like illegal acts, which types of illegal acts could potentially be fraud? So again, paragraph 806, really updating that fraud concept. While we recognize that both detective and preventative controls are needed and you need a proper mix of them in order to mitigate risk to an acceptable level, they are emphasizing that management should prioritize preventative controls by looking at those first, right? They generally are more cost efficient because it's going to prevent it as opposed to having to go fix it on the back end, right? So more cost effective and typically more effective at mitigating fraud and improper payments. Still recognizing that detective is valid, but emphasizing to try to get as many preventative controls on the front end and then kind of fill in the ones that could be detective in your mix, but start and prioritize those controls that would be preventative. So again, that's just some high level items. Definitely take a look. If you are currently using Greenbook, you definitely want to take a look. If that is the system that you're using, if that's the framework that you're applying, definitely want to take a look at that. The planned effective date is October 1st of 2025. That is the new federal year. And so the standards would be effective with the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act of 1982 reports beginning on or after October 1st of 2025. Again, those are really for federal agencies. So if you do have an opinion and you want to provide comment, which I always encourage, the best way to ensure that we have systems that work and rules that make sense is to provide feedback. So comments can be sent via email to greenbookcomments@gao.gov. They would like them by August 26th of 2024. If you have additional questions and you want to follow up, James Delkin is the Director of Financial Management and Assurance, and so you can reach out to him as well. Fun fact, Jim Delkin, many years ago, hired me as an intern, so we can thank Jim for where I've gotten to today. Lots of props to Jim. Still have him in high regard from 20 plus years ago when he started. He was my very first boss, theoretically. And so grateful for him and the fact that he's done so many great things over the years. And he's a wonderful person. So if you see Jim, tell him I said hi. But with that, we're going to wrap up this week's blog. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Please give an idea about that comment letter. I always think that's important. And I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.